Welcome to episode. Does everybody know? I don't even know.
It's 41.
No, it isn't 41.
Yeah, it
Is it actually?
Yep.
Jeez, I wrote 40.
No, we did 40 last time.
Did we really?
Yep.
So I never changed this. There you go. Today we've got confronting death.
Oh, is it?
And I ended up writing confronting death. So
it's a ruin, man.
we discussed, I ended up going
embracing death, not confronting.
Oh, embracing death.
Pretty sure that's what I said.
No, you said confronting death.
I don't
That's
think
why
I
wrote
did.
it.
Don't make me get out my phone again.
The end result was I ended up chatting to you and I was like, death. I think we should just be talking about death, not confronting death or embracing death.
Yep.
But I ended up being like, actually, just writing it in that front made it a little bit more clear of what I wanted to write down, the research I ended up doing. But in the end, it is about death in general, right? So again, probably more the psychology behind it, the mindset behind it.
That was why I wanted to do it.
Yeah. Like I don't think we want to be talking about today, and we'll get into the definition of it, but I don't want to be talking about the
process of dying,
actual death
physically happens to your body.
Yeah, chemically, not something. I didn't go down the path of what was considered death in the past.
Yeah,
although there is some stuff that we could talk about it around embalming and Egyptian. So we'll get into it. But it's confronting death in today's Mere Mortals podcast.
Good.
As always, the Mere Mortal
moment.
All
right, I'll
kick us off.
I'll dive right in. So change can come in jumps, and it's not necessarily gradual. And this is one thing I've been noticing a little bit recently with the workouts I've been doing.
Yep.
I've actually just started really noticing in the handstand push-ups. I'm getting a lot slower, and I'm almost able to hold it like at the bottom, sort of with my nose touching the ground.
Yep.
Now this took like a good 4 months, I think, of practice. And I wasn't exactly sure like I'd see this sort of improvement as well.
Yep.
When you're doing things like this, it's sort of like you just hope it's going to work out because you don't really know each process that's going to happen. Anywho, so I was doing like this for 4 months, and it's sort of like sucks not seeing progress, but it's also I'm just good at doing that now. I sort of put that in the back of my mind and
just continue working through it.
So that's one Mere Mortal moment. Just appreciate that you're going to have periods. It's not a linear curve upwards. It's a lot of plateaus, and then the sort of like big spikes when you notice something.
Yep.
And then the other thing is you got to enjoy the small wins in the interim. And this is funny because I had
this better be 39 subscribers.
It was. It's because I saw we went up to 39 subscribers, and each time we get a subscriber, I'm like doing a dance. I'm enjoying myself. So we jumped down back to one. I was like, no worries, that's easy.
Yeah,
I enjoy the struggle. Then we went to 37.
That's it. You're now beyond the. So you went up the small sort of successes and celebrated.
Dude, it's even better because now I get to celebrate again. When we go to 38
of course.
And 39.
So once we hit 7.9 billion people or 8 billion people in the world,
delete our page, go back to zero,
and restart again. Of course, because we get. God damn.
So those are my two.
Very good. Mine was I said everyone has a view, but recognize your two barriers. Two biggest barriers to good decision making are your ego and your blind spots. So it was an interesting one this week. It was more around just doing all the interviews that we did this week. So there was a lot of interviews. There was a lot of stuff that we did this week.
Yep.
Like in total, I think we must have done 7-8 things combined in between us. More actually.
More.
Between us. Yep. And one of the things I noticed was two of the biggest things that can hurt yourself is your ego, right? And your blind spots. And I think I jumped into at the beginning of the week thinking, I can do all of these, no problem. I'll be able to get them done by the end of the week. With maybe there was blind spots where I thought, and so the blind spots from that I now look back on the week was, okay, there was some stuff with addition that I wasn't too comfortable that I was doing correctly. I didn't set up enough time doing some of the online discussions. And I think there was a mixture of ego and blind spots kind of took over where at the beginning of the week, I was like, I'm comfortable, I'm confident I can do this. But those two things sort of like weighed me down. And at the end of the week, I was actually disappointed because I didn't get enough things that I wanted to do. But if I actually had more realistically looked at it and not egotistically looked at it and gone, actually, genuinely, I probably only can release 2 or 3 of these and the rest are going to have to wait till next week, and that's okay, and schedule them and whatnot.
Yeah.
I would have ended the week probably doing the same amount of work, but in a happier state. So I think ego and blind spots can be two really harmful things to individuals.
And that's a hard one as well. I just finished Elon Musk's biography
By Ashley Vance.
By Ashley Vance. There's a little book review up on that now if you're interested in that. And one of the things in it was when he said multiple times in the book, speaking to his employees, like, no, we need to get this done today because in 10 years' time, we'll be making 10 million profit a day. So each time you're like screwing around or you don't do this thing because like the business day is closing and you don't want to rush and get this done.
Yeah.
That's $10 million that we're going to miss out on in the future.
Yeah.
And so, there's that sort of mindset, which is like, oh shit, I got to get everything done as quickly as I can, but also to a very high degree, which is sort of what he expects from his employees. Versus, I guess, my more just comparing our approaches, I was definitely more like, I'm going to do one interview like per week. So I did one last week and I did one this week, and that was cool with me. And now maybe I'll be a bit more keen to do like, all right, I'll try 2. Whereas you're like, no, I'm going to do 10 and see how I go.
It was very interesting. Well, now definition, back to death, confronting death, embracing death.
Yep.
The mindset of death. We'll figure out what we're going to call this. I went down a very easy path. I went, what does death mean? Right. The end of the life of a person or organism. So my whole way that I'm going to approach it is just the mindset of the end of life of a person or an organism. That's kind of be my definition.
Yeah.
I don't know if yours is very different to that.
Yeah. So like, I suppose just to reiterate, we do this right at the start so that we're both on the same page and we're talking about the same topic and not, I suppose, around each other.
But, and one thing I think, let's just pull stumps for a minute. I think people don't define sometimes things enough just in everyday life or when they're talking about it. So I got stuck into a conversation with someone a couple of weeks ago about passion, and we were just missing each other like completely. And I was like, well, passion is this. You have to, if you don't have passion, you can't be happy. And they're like, nah, that's completely false. That's not what it means, blah, blah. In the end, it was more like what I was, my definition of passion was what they saw as like their ideals or your hobbies or whatever. And they agreed with that. But they thought passion meant something else completely to them, right?
Yeah,
so you got to have a really baseline when two people are talking or whatnot, especially in business. If your terminology is completely off, then you can get really messed up things.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think it's helped us that we do that, because it's not often that we disagree on some things. But sometimes when we need to be like, oh, actually, we're talking about this and not that, then it makes a major difference.
Yeah, so. I think I'd have a different idea of what passion is as well compared to you. So
definitely.
We have talked a little bit about that. Anywho, back to death. So for me, very similar thing: cessation of life, end of an organism's existence. And one of the interesting things comes from morte, from very like ancient English or Latin, and that actually ties in very nicely with me immortals.
Yeah, okay.
Mortal is derived from that.
Morte as well.
Yeah, so death, like if you're immortal.
As immortal.
You won't die.
Good. Yep.
So a couple other words related to that: mortality, mortician, the idea of immortality, and mortgage. So if you have a mortgage, you're going to die.
You're going to die.
Very good.
Very general.
Here's a stat for you just to...
Kick us off.
Yeah, kick us off and I suppose put us in the mindset of what it actually is. There is 150,000 deaths per day. So that roughly equals about 2 every second. So even just in the time we've been talking, probably a good couple of hundred people have died. So it is something that at the moment happens to everyone. And I guess it's like, to me, it doesn't seem we talk about it that much. The ways I have encountered death and the topic of it have been not through, I suppose, my everyday life. So, in work, speaking with colleagues, in, hobbies and sports I used to play, even with friends, we don't really talk about it much.
Yep.
And it's been more in, I suppose, some books I've read. And I think that's a main venue, like books that I've read, and potentially you'll come across a sad story every now and then on YouTube, or like one of those heartstring emotion things. But it definitely is something that it's almost like you have to seek it out in some sort of way, because it's just not very apparent on the surface in everyday life. Do you have a similar sort of I don't know, sense of that or feeling that it's more something, the topic is something you have to seek out?
It is, you have something to seek out. Though one of the things down the research is I encountered this dude called Ira Biok, who's an MD. We didn't even know him. It's just a doctor, right? One of the things he said is, why death perhaps is something that people both fear and is not something that they want to discuss. And he sort of just summarized it as, living in a society where death isn't openly discussed only fuels the sense of anxiety and fear of dying that people have. So I think I see it a lot. I think when people have, died, or even if professionally people who, you have someone a relative who has died, you might say a few words, but it's always a little bit weird. It's a little bit strange to kind of say like, oh, sorry for, like you might say sorry for your loss, or a couple of different words, but we seem to not have the right words or the right structure to behave when that happens. And it's very, very often, not talked about at all. And I think it is because of that, everyone's really anxious, everyone's really stressed when that happens. Sure, obviously it's a momentous thing that might happen, especially the closer someone is to you, the more it's going to feel like it. But it's just discussed so little that it can be very hard to then just be very frank and open around it. And one of the things I started thinking about this, and I'm like, okay, my definition was the end of the life of a person or organism. Yep. So that is death when you think about it from humanity perspective. But I kind of took this away from something that Jocko's written down, something that I've seen in a couple of places, where just the death of insert abstract thing. Also, people don't really, I guess, pay attention to, nor discuss, not really get into it. So my example is, and one thing that he talked about, imagine you break up with your significant other after X amount of time, right? Yeah. That is, if you look at it from an abstract perspective, the death of a relationship, the end of a relationship.
Ending, yeah.
Right? Not many people out there really know what to do with that. So some suggestions that obviously Jocko provides is like, go and run 2 miles and work out for a couple of days. And, what you'd imagine Jocko to recommend. But in that sort of mind, like the fact that you laugh makes me realize, like, that's obviously a suggestion from him, but some people can find it like, well, that's silly, or it's just the way that you would imagine that. There's not a really tested or verified or openly discussed way about how to, really grieve correctly or specifically talk about death in a non-anxious and a non-stigmatized version. So I think everyone who I've come across, who I've probably talked about it with, it has taken, never like in the first discussion, it's always been like a couple of discussions into it that you really start talking about like, oh, death. Okay, what's the meaning of that? What is that feeling to you? Are you scared of death? Yes or no? You never really get into that in the first sort of encounter with an individual unless they're really open. Yeah. It sort of takes a little while. I don't know if that's sort of similar feeling you felt.
I'd say so. And, just what you were talking about then does bring to mind to me that grief is almost like a sort of separate topic related to it, which is like intense loneliness, or it's an intense feeling of loss.
Yep.
And, it just reminds me that back in the day, if you experienced a loss, everyone would go into mourning, and, widows, for example, would have they would wear like a black covering over their veil. And it was sort of expected and known that, okay, this person was obviously grieving, they'd experienced a loss. So it was sort of like a physical thing for you to see that, okay, that you should probably treat these people a little bit differently. And so I think it is something that you shouldn't just treat them as if everything is normal. Because obviously their whole world has been rocked by a loss of a loved one. And that's potentially something that I guess is like a little bit different nowadays, because we don't have that similar sort of physical identifier that someone is going through something very harsh. So it still brings up the question of how you interact, I guess, with someone who's going through grieving. That. Well, I don't have any personally good advice on that. And
I was just about to say, and I don't know how much info you've got or we're going to talk about it, but I wanted to bring that up with the grieving, but let's split it away.
Yeah.
So grieving is another thing, right? Yeah. It's probably another. So I wanted to touch point on that because I think a lot of, like, just the fact that death in general that's something that comes out, right? Grieving. And grieving is just not something that's even understood, right? But it's the whole center of death and, an end to something that's really not understood well. And I think it can also come to, let's just talk scientifically right about it. There's no one out there that you can really pinpoint to say like, what happens when you die?
Yeah.
And I think people are really anxious about that. People can be like, well, if you're religious, you might think that you're going to go to heaven or hell, or you might be going somewhere else, reincarnated. If you're atheist and you just think that's it, that's where life ends, or you could think that life resets, or you go to a multiverse, right? There's all these things.
Yeah.
But there's no real scientific proof to say like, this is what happens when you die. I think people are afraid of that. I think people are really, afraid of the unknown.
Yeah.
So sometimes that can be one center of death, is that nobody's really not going to know both when it happens sometimes and what happens afterwards, and it creates a lot of uncertainty and sort of stress around it. For sure.
Yeah, well, I had written down here, is there something that religions get right in this sense? I personally have a lot of problems with the dogma that is associated with a lot of religions. I think there's a lot of really good stuff in them.
Yeah.
But also,
good stuff wrapped around the fact that it's a religion.
There's some silly rules and whatnot that goes on. But I think one thing they do get very right is they at least talk about it. And there's something I've heard Sam Harris talk a couple of times is, say you have a death or something in your family, who is it that you would go talk to if you were experiencing, that loss, that grief, whatever it is. And, it's not your next door neighbor. It's not the milkman. It's you're going to go to a priest or something like that, just because there's something associated with religions. It's
like the understood channel that you go to have that discussion.
Exactly. I think there might even be, potentially nowadays, I haven't particularly looked into it, but potentially there are psychologists dealing exclusively in grieving or loss of a loved one, and that potentially could take the role of the priest or something like that going into the future. But I think one of the things that religions really get right is, regardless of their ideas of death, and like you were mentioning, it's very hard. No one knows. It's one of those, what's the meaning of life? What's afterlife? That sort of question. They at least talk about it. And, through the talking about it, I think you can get a lot of the psychological benefits from, I guess, understanding this happens to everyone. This, I suppose like their language that they use is a lot more helpful than if you're just in a society without a religion, like a strong religious core or whatnot.
At least they appease the monkey brain of, thinking about, what's going to happen. If you believe, okay, well, you're going to be reincarnated, and you truly believe that, then you can find peace in yourself and be like, okay, well, if I go or this person dies, that's going to happen to them. And whether it actually happens or not is non-trivial. At least you're not afraid of death, or your mindset around death is a bit different. So I've got a couple of things that, I noted down. I was sort of finding about, why generally people are scared of death, or the mindset behind it. But before I jump directly into that, I was going to ask you the broad question that always gets asked about this sort of stuff, which sometimes people talk about, and then they can get into certain depth. And it's, so are you afraid of death?
I've contemplated it. It's, it's sort of hard to say, because sometimes like I feel like I've at least addressed it in my life. And so I've actively sought out, and I'll get into them, a couple of books relating around death. One of the hard things for me though is I personally haven't had a very close loved one die. I've had, a couple of grandparents, but that was kind of difficult because one of them was in New Zealand, so I'd only see her like once every 2 years. My two other grandparents lived in Newcastle who've passed away. Once again, I sort of knew them, but not really. It was sort of, a sad, but also not a world-shattering thing for me. And I've been very, very fortunate that, none of my friends were very close friends or anyone like that. So it's hard for me to say, like, am I afraid of it? Because I haven't felt that loss that also comes with knowing someone else's. But I wouldn't say it's something that that particularly drives me either. It's not like I wake up and am too scared to do things because I might die. But I'm also not using it in the sense that some people do, which is like, I'm going to die someday, so I need to get everything done that I can, which potentially maybe I should use it a little bit more like
in that manner.
Yeah. How about you?
Mine's an interesting one because as far back as I can remember, I haven't really, if you're talking about like a sort of death, I'm afraid of death or the mindset behind it, I've never been afraid of it, but I've also not thought about it as death in itself. And it was interesting when I read the sentence, I've always been like, oh no, I wish I'm going to live 1,000 years. Yeah. But more my mindset was like, it's because I want to see like everything that there is going to be. Like, even when I was probably like 12, 13 years old, I remember recalling being like, damn, I've only got 70 years left or 80 years left. I wish I'll have like 300 more because I'll be able to see all this other stuff. And to me, the idea in reading fiction books around, everlasting, lives and, what that means in a proper scientific way, but also just like what you could experience and whatnot, it really enthralled me. And I was like, oh, that's to me like really amazing. So the shortening of life or the ending of life for an organism to me was like, oh, it's just knowing that you didn't get to experience as much of the things that you wanted to. So I think my mindset with death has been, now that I'm a little bit older, I've kind of moved a little bit back to okay, it's not so much that I want to live 300, 500, 1,000 years to experience everything. Yeah. It's more like, I just want to be whatever the time period that I'm alive. It's a time that you get to do the things that you enjoy. And whenever death comes around, like that's okay. You were doing exactly the things that you wanted to do. Yeah. But then when I think about death and the mindset about death, when it comes to other people, then it gets a little bit impacted because I can't specifically control what those individuals are doing. And then that's where I think there's a little bit of stress and anxiety because you go, okay, well, if they died, to me in my mind, it's like, oh, well, did they do the things that they wanted to do? Were they happy when, were they doing, or were they annoyed for 10 years or whatnot? So I see it, that's a little bit more difficult. But then personally, I'm like, oh, fine, as long as you're doing the stuff you want to do, cool. Yeah. So it brings back to this outlook. I'm gonna absolutely butcher how this is said. This outlook on death is broadly Heideggerian, I believe it's termed. Heideggerian, whatever that. So it's the people who haven't done what they came to do.
Heidegger. I think that's a philosopher, right?
I believe so.
Yeah.
It's the people who haven't done what they came to do in life who are the most scared of death. And when I read that, I was like, okay, like that kind of sings to me. It was, if you kind of, people can term it like, if you live every 70 years of your life the same way, just 1 year, 70 times, like, did you really live? So it's kind of spinning a little bit where people who are scared of death are those people who are probably doing little that follows their passion or their wants or their needs. And they kind of like, in my mind, it's like, okay, well, they're just like, oh, but I don't want death because I've got regrets. I haven't done this. I haven't done that. And if you get into a mindset of like, well, you're always just doing exactly what you want to do, that's within, obviously I'm not saying people go and just commit murder or something just because that's what you want. Yeah. But within society's realm, you're going to backtrack a little bit in your mindset if you are scared of death or you're a little bit afraid or stressed out in that regard. So found it interesting. So that particular sentence came from a book, In Being and Time, from 1927. And he argues, this is, how do you call it? How do you pronounce it?
I think it's Heidegger.
Heidegger. He argues that confronting death brings to light the totality of our potentiality for being. So he more looks at it, you should look at it, the fact of death, as being what brings you to be the most mortal being you can out of your life. So it should be spun the other way to bring positivity. Almost kind of like an extreme negative visualization to a point, right? Which is obviously very, very extreme, but it's kind of almost what he's sort of suggesting. I don't know, have you ever sort of seen it that way or felt it that way?
I mean, it's not something that I've personally been able to use in the sense of either a negative or a positive. It's sort of more like a neutral thing for me. Yeah. So you hear about those people who use it to push themselves onwards because they realize I'm only going to live once, so I've got to try and get everything done that I want to. I don't use it that way, but also it doesn't feel like it's like a looming restriction or a looming bad thing that's going to come up for me. It's sort of more of a neutral thing. One thing that you were just mentioning though that sort of piqued like a little
interest in your mind.
A question in my mind was, so a lot of people talk about immortality and trying to conquer aging, and there's some people out there. David Sinclair's one. There's another guy, escaping my mind at the moment who it is. A little big long beard, so that'll narrow down the field. Anywho, there's people out there who say that we should view aging as a disease, and that it can be conquered, and that we should be trying to do everything we can to conquer it. And it was just making me wonder. So, like, you just talked about how people are sometimes scared of death, I guess, because it's almost like it's an end point. There's no, you don't get to rewind and play the tape again and do those things. So, say it's funny because you'd say, oh yeah, I'm scared of doing something, but I've got time in the future. Like it's sort of like a postponing. I'll be able to do it later. And then death is that reminder that, oh no, wait, you can't
keep going.
That. If those same sort of people then were given, the shot in the arm, the injection, the vaccine that made them immortal, would it actually, I guess, make their life worse in the sense that they're always going to keep putting it off? So I would say that sort of person who, is scared of death is sort of because of that, because they realize there's an end point and they can't put off the thing that they've been putting off further, so they just don't like to think about it. But say they're immortal and they could just keep pushing it off indefinitely. I'm immortal, I can do that in 100 years time. But they still feel shit because they're not doing the thing that they want to do. Would that actually just make their whole life even worse?
I think in that
an interesting thought, because if people talk about immortality, it's always a good thing.
There's no bad sides to it.
Yeah, exactly. But what if you're having a shit life and now you're immortal? You're just going to have an immortality of negativity and pain and whatnot.
So. Of a life being like Manshil. It would be, it'd be pretty difficult. No, one of the things I was thinking about it with, so it's an interesting question, and it always makes me think about, because when I was thinking about this topic, I'm like, okay, death, and again, it's like humans, people, animals, maybe, loved ones. But then you broaden it out to like other things that die, like I was talking about earlier. And everything goes through the cycles, right? I don't have a pen right now, but in essence, you got that, essentially a curve of like, you go up and you go down in terms of life begins, you have energy, everything's going really well, and you're going to have your sort of tapering point. If you, like you were saying, you continue to live forever, there's going to be those individuals that are kind of like not doing much with their life, and they're just going to continue doing that. They just not going to care to do that. And I think it's actually a benefit to have these up and downs behind it. One, because it allows you to obviously be motivated to go and do this, but you have a finite endpoint to go. That's sort of the end stop. That's the limit. You're not going to be either perhaps burning out because you're just going nuts and you don't care, and all of a sudden it just creates some anarchy. But I think if the more people could live longer, like if humanity, general humans live to like 200, 300 years, I think everything would be a lot slower. Because just people would think there's a lot more time. Potentially. But the one thing I was saying about the cycles was, if you think about it too, one thing I've been looking at currently, like currencies or like empires or countries and whatnot. Generally all of those things also have a beginning and an end, right? They have a birth, if you want to call it like that, and they've got a death to them. And sometimes people can get really stuck into the fact of being you. Like you're a human and you are, for all intents and purposes, the center of everything for yourself, right? Sometimes just stepping back and taking a really big perspective and being like, sure, you are, but again, there's 8 billion of us, and we all are born and we all are gonna die. Same thing happens with cities. Same thing happens with empires, right? Like things do rise up and they do fall down, and it's not something that's uniquely happening to you that you should be afraid of. It's something that is just a natural cycle of, I guess, our universe that happens. Easier said than done though, because I think just generally we'll tend to be a little bit more, the perspective will be on us, and we'll be like, well, no, I wouldn't want to die. And I think that's where I originally thought about it with like, well, I just want to be living as long as possible so I can do as many things.
Yeah.
And even though I'm not saying that I'm like, my mindset is already this, but I think my mindset's a little bit closer to, well, yeah, there is an endpoint, and that's okay. That's what you use as your sort of measuring stick, and going, okay, that's what I want to do. And you can actually assess what are your short-term goals, medium-term goals, and long-term goals, or else a short-term goal might become 100 years. And it'll be like, I want to do a pull-up in 100 years. And it's like, well, okay, sure. But yeah, you're just essentially stretching out and becoming lazier for the fact that you've got more time.
Yeah. Interesting. I suppose one of the things that to consider with that is you were sort of saying the inevitability of everything coming to an end there. And I guess the first principle reasoning for that is of entropy, which is that unless, there's some real crazy breakthrough in physics and about how we understand our universe at the moment, everything is going to die. Like there's no, and we're talking everything, even atoms and whatnot are just going to break apart and sort of become a morass of nothingness in however many billion years they've calculated that. I can't remember.
And if people, entropy, I think you can define it as essentially just the dispersing of energy.
The tendency to disorder is what I think it's the best way of describing it. So if you have like things nicely lined up, they're going to break apart, and there's just some sort of principle.
It's the example. It's easier to break an egg than to put the egg together. It requires more energy to put the egg together than breaking the egg in the first place.
I am half chicken though, so
you make eggs. You are the energy producer.
Okay, so I want to talk about a couple of books I've read that I think address the topic pretty nicely. One of these I read a couple of years ago called "Making Friends with Death" by Judith Life. And it's sort of more of a Buddhist philosophy. And the couple of books I have read on this, another one is The Five Invitations by Frank Ostasecky.
Okay.
And both of them, this one has Buddhist philosophy, he has Zen. And that's how they sort of approach, woven into the book is their philosophy or the Buddhist philosophy and Zen philosophy. And I suppose one of the things that she talks about in it is sort of trying to establish some virtues to cultivate and accept the inevitable death. And she talks about kindness, compassion, simplicity, and acceptance. And in the end part of the book, it's been a while, a couple of years since I read this, so I was just looking over my own notes of it. And I did say in that there's some really good recommendations that she has in the book for how to care for people who are dying. I suppose the type of language you'd use, your physicality and how you would interact with them, what sort of presence of mind you want to try and establish. So if someone is going through, a loved one dying or something like that, I would recommend that book. I found that pretty good. And the other one is one I'm reading at the moment and rereading, which is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, Stoic philosophy. And in both of these books, and I think most of them as in general, is they talk a lot about the present. So really trying to cultivate that mindset of being in the present moment. And it's not something you can do all the time because obviously as humans, we need to be able to look back at our own mistakes, see what went badly and fix them. And that's how you learn. But then also look to the future and say, okay, how am I going to anticipate things? And, that's, I suppose, what sets us apart from animals because we can look back in the past and look into the future. But if we're doing that all the time, there's no emphasis on the present. And if you're living in the present moment, the concept of death doesn't really exist because you're just in the present.
You'd be dead if it was,
So I think that's just one nice little thing that you can get from these books is just try and establish, and meditation is probably the easiest way of doing this, of living in the present moment and using that to like intersperse throughout your day. So meditation isn't something that you should, I think for most people should be, a little sprinkling here and there, like icing on the cake or whatnot. And then, but the foundation is obviously you're going to be thinking about the future and planning, which is just what humans do.
Yeah.
So just that emphasis on living in the present, and I'm not good enough at describing what that feeling feels like or how to do it or whatnot. So I think I'll just leave it at that for the moment. But that was one thing I've noticed a lot throughout all these books. Potentially, if you're viewing death in a really negative way, try some sort of meditation practice or something to establish being in the present moment, and that whole concept just goes away, like a cloud lifting over your head or whatnot.
Well, it's a typical sort of headspace sort of mentality.
Yeah, exactly.
And it makes sense when you talk about that meditation because, death is, being preoccupied with something that hasn't happened. And it goes back to, being anxious about something, just like you'd be anxious about maybe a test that you didn't study for. Right. It's just that, but just across a different topic. So sounds like meditation could be something that brings you back to, it centers you to go, well, sure, that is going to happen, but be grateful about right now where you are, what you can see, what you can smell, all those sort of things, and it'll dissipate to, apart from being anxious, you'll just be a little bit more grateful of, well, at least you haven't died yet.
Yeah.
Kind of mentality.
Yeah, for sure. So did you have any personal thoughts on the afterlife? We touched on it before, but...
I think I've always just thought two camps. One is when you die, that's it. It's sort of like lights out. There's no your brain. So if I'm looking at scientifically, your brain doesn't have any more pulses of energy or electricity.
Yep.
So there is no brain matter or thought processes. So essentially, like if you were in a coma without any dreams or anything, you'd just be out. That's it. Nothing's going to occur further beyond that from your mindset perspective. I've always thought, and obviously this is very extreme, I've always thought and looked into a theory of multiverse theory where, not to get into the long of it, but where it sort of discusses where, Big Bang, right, it's sort of something that exploded, it's an extraction and it comes back through. There's a bit of discussion around how that could be done in a multiverse environment. So as one universe contracts, the other one sort of increases sort of on the other side of sort of a Big Bang, and you could have that in multiple levels. You could similarly have something like or that effect in sort of a multi-dimensional environment with life, right?
Yeah.
So life, we are 3D creatures in a 4-dimensional space, if you think about it, with time as well. There is ideologies, like there's more dimensions beyond that, just stuff that we can't even comprehend. So if there is that sort of example is, if there was more dimensions here in this room that we're in now, we as 3D creatures have no idea about it. And we can only see the passing of some potential dimensions going through our space.
Yeah.
There's nothing more that we only see like a particular plane of it. And I have some ideas that perhaps, when you do die, there is some movement that we might not know about into other dimensions in terms of our being or whatnot.
Yeah.
But predominantly, I say 90%, it's just you die, that's it.
That's it.
Shut down, nothing else.
Yeah.
Off you go.
Interesting. Yeah, for me, it's sort of like the question is just more of a neutral, like an unanswerable one for me at the moment. Potentially in the future, especially if we create AI, and that maybe opens up a bit of the door onto like what is consciousness, which is a very strange and very hard to handle topic.
Yep.
But for me, it's sort of like I can't say that there's nothing, but I can't say that there's something either. It's just I don't know. Like
I also think it's a question that, like you say, it's an unanswerable question, right? I think you can hypothesize and talk about it all you want, but I mean, obviously, if someone comes up with a way to prove it, well, sure, whatever. I've left the door open for that to happen. But if it doesn't, I think people need to be okay with that fact or be firmly in a belief that they're happy with whatever they decide to be. So going back to religion and death, if you so believe that, it is going to be a reincarnation and like, that's fine. Totally believe it. And if that puts you in the right mindset for it and everything, sure. I mean, if you think of reincarnation, but you still are like really stressed out that you're going to turn into, I don't know, chimpanzee or something.
Yeah.
And it's stressing you out. Then that's going to make you feel a little bit more anxious. I think it's just whatever you want to tell yourself, whatever storyline you want to tell yourself that for you, you're happy and content with, I think I'd be okay with that.
Yeah. So. Yeah. One of the couple of like thought experiments is so time is relative. And so we experience it just going in one direction, but I think the whole thing that Einstein proved was like, no, it can go in the other. Like there's nothing special about it going this way. It going the other way is sort of just the same thing.
Yeah.
So if you think about it in that sense, it's like, okay, so if we lived our lives in going the opposite direction, where we came from babies, like we're heading towards being a baby, sort of Benjamin Button thing, what would be beyond a baby in that sense? And so that I think that might put into like a little bit of a context of, okay, why particularly would we go to heaven, for example? Are babies in heaven before they're born
creation
and
or
things
something
like that? And then the other things with heaven is like, okay, which is it as I am right now, like exactly when I die, that's how I go to heaven? So is there like a bunch of old people and then a bunch of babies and then a bunch of
people in between?
Or is it like you get to choose what body you get, which would be kind of cool. And the other one would be, so the Walt Disney thing. So he got his head frozen, I believe. And it's still frozen somewhere, probably, maybe. And say we actually managed to do that. And I think one of the things with that is when you freeze something at the moment, the technology, there's something like crystallization happens in the brain. And so it like changes the structure of the atoms. And so even if you were able to like
roll back, it kind of like mess them up.
So say like we had his head and then we, jacked up or basically created like a mechanical body that it was exactly the way his used to be, stuck it on and then flick the switch. There's still like some degradation in the brain and whatnot. But say someone got frozen for 200 years and we brought them back, I would probably say that they were dead during that time. But would that change how we viewed it differently if you could just take sort of chunks of time out and then you're back again and then take another chunk of time out and then you're back again?
Yeah, well, and I was getting to that, right? Death, it's the end of a life of a person or organism, but it doesn't particularly talk about like a person and organism, like to me screams like human body objects, atoms, that sort of thing. Because the whole discussion of what if you could upload your entire mind and being into a computer. And then you like imagine, let's not even think that you're like some robotic thing that walks around. You will legitimately just all upload it into a computer. Are you like, is that death? Did you go through death? Because sure, your organism and your body, your human suit is dead, gone, not usable, but you're uploaded into a computer and perhaps you're interacting in the way through information and whatever else. People can talk about, well, okay, that's extending death. But to me, at least, I go, well, I think at that point, you've died as a human being and then you're something else. You're an object.
Yeah, there's something
some
different
other form.
about it.
And that's when the discussion can get into, AI and what is or isn't, what's beyond just a robot and what's something that's conscious and whatnot. But I think I draw the line at, if you upload, say, yourself into a computer and your human suit's left to the side, I think that's what you can call death. That's dead at that point, and that's something beyond. I think getting into the whole mixture of it, then it's like, okay, well, you're just mixing things up now altogether.
And then the hard thing is, I guess, like, okay, so say my arm got ripped off in an accident or whatnot, and then I got a robotic one arm and it was pretty much the same thing. Then it's like, okay, at what point of me changing things in my body does it change from me being human to something different?
Like if you go beyond 50%, like just metal pieces,
exactly.
Are you really human anymore, or are you like a robot?
What point? Was there anything else? Okay, here's one. How often does it come into your daily thoughts? I'd say like the thought of death, or
I'd say never now. Never. The only time I ever think about death is when it comes from like external to me, when it's like a person who I'm close to or someone I know who is like, they might be sick or they might be dying or something like that order, then I might worry or be stressed because it's someone else that I can't effectively directly change things for them or take actions for them. But personally, I don't think not something I think about.
So just until recently, it's probably something I as well would say it was, definitely had to be an external stimulus for me to think about. Now I try and do it in the mornings with how I've been saying with the negative visualization. But one of the things I do think is that I do seek it out in other ways as well. So war books, for example, So I've been reading a couple of those recently as well. And, I think those are good because they can take you into a world where everything is a lot worse. And, it's in our lifetimes, or there's people alive now who've experienced World War II and whatnot, who've fought in that. So it's still something that's around and definitely possible. And I think it's just good for that sort of thing to realize, we're only an asteroid strike away from everything being completely turned upside down. So I think it is something that is necessary to think about at least every once in a while.
I think I probably, when you say it, I do think about it, but not in the explicit way of death, more in the side of every day or every week I'm like, oh, I should be doing and wanting to be doing the things that I want to be doing, because like you say, asteroid, whatever else happens, if it was to suddenly end or whatever, be in a state that always, no matter what, you're just happy about where you're up to. Could take, okay, now, fantastic, cool. I've done everything I wanted to be doing up to that point. You can't have, I guess it gets back to, how the way you think about regrets and not doing particular things that could, influence the way that you think about death. So maybe I do think about it, but from the perspective of, I don't want to have a regretful life or that sort of mindset.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think actually I'll leave that for another one. That's another thought I was having. Basically, it was around, I think if you conquer maybe those one or two things that you really wish you'd done, you can sort of feel happy with not having done a lot of the other ones as well. But as long as you know that you could have done them, potentially, that sort of thing. You got any more that you particularly want to talk about?
Look, the only thing that I ended up reading, again, it was from the Ira Boyk, MD. He suggested being prepared to say goodbye to death. And I kind of took this as a death to another individual or yourself. He was saying there's 4 things to say. Please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. And I love you. And you are better able to say goodbye. So he was saying we can't change the fact that we are mortal, but we can express our gratitude and forgiveness to the people we love and let them know there's nothing left unsaid. And I sort of just took that more as you should live your life day to day and without leaving things unsaid. I think if you can continue to do that, so the biggest takeaway I took it from there is just don't leave things unsaid. And if you live like that in a day-to-day basis, not just at end of life where it's someone's about to die, you're like, oh, I forgive you, whatever, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Sure, okay, that might help then, I believe. But if you're doing that every day and you're leaving things unsaid and doing what feels to be the truth to you, then I think you will travel through life in a way that you're not going to be scared of death or just have the right mindset about death. Because death, everyone knows death is just that. It is a thing, right? As assured as you are that you're going to be born, there's just an assurance that you're going to die. I think the famous quote that Gary always pumps out is, for you to be born is a 1 in 400 trillion chance. And it's to do with, the ability to be born, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. But it's 100% true that you're going to die.
Yeah.
Right now, 100% true. You are going to die.
Yeah.
And why get stuck to the fact of worrying about what's surely going to happen and worry about all the things that come in between there? So I think living life where you don't leave things unsaid is probably a worthwhile life.
Yeah. So cool. Nice. All right. I wanted to end it on the light side of death. So have you ever read any of the Darwin Awards books?
I think I've read a couple of them, not a lot of them. No.
There's 2 stories from them that I absolutely love and that have just stuck in my mind. And I read this book more than 10 years ago.
Darwin Awards are the awards for essentially silly death.
People dying, they have a very sort of strict criteria from it. And it's not even dying, because I think it's the inability to reproduce. So if someone does something so stupid that they affect their reproductive organs as well,
it's also considered
that's also counted, but it is more the dying part. So it's people doing stupid shit, just objectively the most stupid shit you can imagine, and removing themselves from the gene pool. So there's 2 that I absolutely love. My coming in second is someone who was I'm not sure if it's still nowadays, looking out the window. Yeah, there is. So with electricity poles, there's like a sort of glass thing on the top that the line runs through.
Yeah.
Like a little glass pole.
Yep.
So this dude in America, I think most of these were in America. He was he had like a shotgun.
Yeah.
And he was shooting these for practice. Shot one and it sort of fell off the whole pole. And he was like, "Oh shit! It's gonna like hit this long, thick grass here, catch fire, and then I'm gonna get like done for arson or something."
Yeah.
So he ran over, and as it was falling, he grabbed it. Obviously.
Yeah.
Electrified. The other
What
one,
a way to go.
Yeah. This one is my favorite though. The other one is just straight up Looney Tunes. So this dude went to it was the redwood trees.
The giant redwoods in
Sequoia,
California.
Yeah.
Yep.
And he was going there illegally and cutting woods because it's extremely valuable, and he'd sort of cut it down during the night, take it in his ute or whatnot, and then sell it on later woods.
Yeah.
So
I can kind of already imagine what's going to happen here. Yeah.
So he climbs up this tree and he's cutting off one of these big ass branches, cutting it, and people find him in the morning like laying down on the ground. It's like, oh my God, did you fall out of the tree? What happened? He was cutting the branch he was standing on, straight out Looney Tunes. Cut the branch. He fell off to his death with the tree branch. So
should have pulled the Wile E. Coyote style where he just levitates in midair for a little while and then jumps away.
yeah.
It's like one interesting thing. I'll bring it up before we get into the fitness challenge or whatnot. Was if you ever watched Looney Tunes, right? Wile E. Coyote, all of those ones back in the day, death was kind of seen as like a funny thing because Roadrunner would always beat the coyote, and the coyote would like die, right? It would get blown up, would fall off a cliff.
Yeah. X's on the eyes.
Yeah. But it was kind of like
as an angel to heaven. And
and it was always kind of like come back and whatnot.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to me that it was always like, there was a lot of death back then, and now there's no cartoons that do that, right? But if you look back a couple of 20 years ago, that was mentality. It was like, that's fine, that's cool, that always happens.
Yeah.
What an interesting thing. Very good. Confronting death, embracing death.
Nice.
Whatever we call it. That was episode 41.
Good.
If you want to check out more things as well on the YouTubes, on the Twitter. Twitter went crazy lately.
Really?
Actually.
Okay.
Because I got a tweet back from Gary Chuck. And I think we actually ended up going like over 100 replies to that particular comment and likes and shares and all this sort of stuff. So I was like, very good.
Cool.
Check out the interviews. If you haven't checked out the interviews, do so. That'd be very fun. I haven't gone through all of Ty's one yet, but got to get through that. And also, if you want to check out some Spanglish, some Espanol, you can also check out mi immortal Michael's.
Yes. Well, it's not Spanglish. It's all.
It's all Spanish actually, but
it's just pure, unmistakable, fluent Spanish. It's nothing more to be said.
Yeah, he's just waiting for death now. Now that he's accomplished that.
My Spanish is on the mend. It's still a work in progress, but I can at least have a conversation.
Yeah, so that was good. Check that out if you want to. And of
check
course,
that out.
Instagrams, Facebooks, everything else. Check it out.
Good.
Fitness challenge points. Tell me, where are we up to?
Well, I'm going negative because last week I talked some smack that I'd got into 52, and this is probably like the third or fourth time I've miscalculated. So I'm not at 52. I'm at 49.
Okay. Nothing new this week?
No. Handstand points are coming. They're very, very
getting close. Well, you were a second off.
And I've sort of fixed my form. I think one of the things I was doing was I was leaning forward a little bit too much because it's a lot easier to stop yourself falling over backwards because you can just push more through the fingers. Whereas if you fall sort of forwards,
there's not really anything you can hold.
Yeah, you just don't have the strength. There's nothing in the palm to really move. So it's sort of more like a adjustment you have to make in the top. So one of the things I was doing, I was leaning forward more, which was putting a lot more stress on my scapula. So one of the things I've been experimenting with is like sort of pushing my chest through a bit more, and I'm noticing I'm feeling a lot better I'm like consistently getting to a minute.
Nice.
And I'm falling over more just I think through like a lack of balance, lack of
lots of concentration or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I feel that points coming really
good.
quick.
All right, I'm on 35.
Yeah,
35 points.
Yes.
And
so you got something?
I didn't get this week. It was from the previous week. So that was my actual score of where I was up to.
Yep.
Gyms are going to open up hopefully soon. 12th of June.
Yeah.
Maximum of 20 people. So I'll be at the door at midnight waiting for them to open and get all my points in one go. We'll see. I think there'll be some points when they finally open up.
Yeah,
but
nice.
who knows?
Very cool.
Good stuff. All right.
Excelente.
One out.
Karen out.